Okay, so we're back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at ISO 1911.2018.
Yeah, a big one, a really foundational standard for anyone who's involved in auditing management systems.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the go-to guide for setting up and running audits, really no matter what kind of organization we're talking about.
Right, so it's not just for like mega corporations, but also for smaller businesses, nonprofits, all that.
Absolutely. Any organization that uses management systems, this standard can help make sure their audits are actually, well, useful, meaningful, gives them good info to work with.
Makes sense. And today we're zeroing in on one specific part of 1911, right? Clause 7, all about auditor competence. So how do you know if the person doing your audit actually knows what they're doing? That's kind of what this clause digs into.
Exactly. And it's more than just, oh, do they have a certificate? It's like, what are the skills, the knowledge, the behaviors? How do you evaluate all that? This stuff's crucial if you want to have confidence in the audit results.
Right, because a bad audit, I mean, that's just a waste of everyone's time and energy. So Clause 7 is like the quality control for the auditors themselves, kind of.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It sets the bar,
Mm.
and it gives you a structured way to make sure those doing audits can actually clear that bar.
Oh, okay, so let's jump into it. Clause 7.1 is kind of the overview, the general principles, right? What's the big picture here?
Yeah, so 7.1 starts off by saying, hey, if you want an audit you can trust, it all comes down to the people, the auditors, the audit team leaders. Their competence is the foundation.
So you're saying the actual individuals matter, not just like the process they're following.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about ticking boxes, oh, they have this training, they've done this many audits.
Yeah.
7.1 says you got to look at their behavior, their knowledge, their skills. It's a more holistic view.
Okay, so how do you actually measure that? Like, what goes into evaluating someone's competence?
So the standard says you got to consider their experience, right? That's education, work experience, any audit-specific training they've done, and then their actual audit experience, like hands-on in the field.
So it's not like you just get certified once and you're good forever.
No, no, no. It's got to be ongoing. This evaluation, it's not a one-time thing, and it should be tailored to the audit program itself, the specific goals and needs of that program.
Right, because an audit for a tiny startup is going to be way different from an audit for like a Fortune 500 company.
Exactly. And the standard acknowledges that. It says, look, there are some universal skills any auditor needs, but then there's also specialized knowledge depending on what you're auditing. It could be the industry, the type of management system, the scope. It all factors in.
So you might have a team where not everyone's an expert on everything, but together they've got all the bases covered.
Yeah, that's the idea. The team's overall competence, that's what matters. Each individual might have their strength, and as long as the team as a whole is equipped to meet the audit objectives, you're good.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the evaluation process itself. 7.1 lays out 4 steps, right?
Right. First, you got to figure out what competence you actually need. What are the must-haves for your auditors, given your specific situation?
Okay, so you define what good looks like for your audits. Then what?
Then you got to set your criteria. Like, how will you actually measure that competence?
Yeah.
What are the benchmarks?
The yardstick, right. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've got your definition, your measurement.
Yeah.
What's next?
Then you got to choose your methods. How are you going to evaluate interviews, maybe review past audit work, observe them during an actual audit?
Makes sense. So it's like tailor-made for your needs, right? And finally,
Do you actually do the evaluation? Using those methods against those criteria. It's about gathering data, getting a solid picture of where each person stands.
and what happens with the results? Like, what's the point of all this evaluation?
Well, the results tell you who's ready for what. Helps you pick the right people for specific audits.
Matching skills to the task at hand. Okay, what else?
It also shows you where there are gaps. Maybe someone needs more training in a specific area or more experience with a certain type of audit.
So it helps you pinpoint areas for improvement.
Exactly. And it all feeds into their performance evaluation. It's not just a one-time check. It's part of an ongoing process. Continuous improvement,
Right, because you want your auditors to be growing and developing their skills over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And 7.1 really emphasizes that. Auditors, they've got a responsibility to keep learning, developing, maintaining their competence, professional development, regular audit participation. It's all part of the deal.
Okay, so we've got the big picture of auditor competence. Now, 7.2 gets into how you actually determine what competence is needed.
Right. 7.2 says, look, you got to consider a bunch of factors. It's not just about the auditor. It's about the organization being audited, the auditee, and the audit itself. The context matters.
Okay, so walk me through those factors. What are some of the key things to consider?
Well, first off, the auditee's size. Are they a
Yeah.
small shop or a huge multinational? That changes the game.
Right. Makes sense. Resources, complexity, all that. What else?
Their nature, what do they do? Manufacturing, services, tech. Each industry's got its quirks.
Right. And the standards might be applied differently depending on the industry. What else should we think about?
Their complexity. How many moving parts are there? What kind of products or services do they offer? Their processes, are they straightforward or super intricate? All this impacts what the auditor needs to understand.
So we're building a profile of the organization, essentially. Okay, what about the audit itself? How does that factor in?
Well, the methods you're using. On-site, remote, document review heavy, lots of interviews, different methods, different skills needed.
Makes sense. You need the right tools for the job. And obviously, the management system standards themselves play a big role.
Huge role. Which disciplines are you auditing? Quality management, environmental, information security, something else. Each standard has its own body of knowledge.
And some organizations might have, like, a super complex integrated management system.
Yeah, that definitely ups the ante in terms of the competence needed. You got to be able to navigate that whole web of processes and requirements.
Okay, so we've got the auditee, the audit methods, the standards. Anything else?
Risks and opportunities. What's the management system designed to address? What are the big potential problems, the big chances for improvement? The auditor needs to understand that landscape.
So they're not just checking boxes. They're actually assessing if the system's working as intended.
Exactly. And then the audit program itself. What are the objectives? What's the scope? A big, wide-ranging program needs a team with diverse competence.
Right, because you might be covering a lot of ground. And sometimes things are kind of fuzzy, right? Not everything's black and white in an audit.
Yet there's uncertainty. And competent auditor, they got to be able to deal with that to still make sound judgments even when things aren't crystal clear.
So good judgment, critical thinking, all that. And what about those other relevant requirements the standard mentions? What does that mean?
That's where the client or other stakeholders might have specific needs. Maybe there's a regulation that says auditors need a certain certification, or the client's own internal policies might dictate some things.
So it's like the context sets the baseline, and then there might be these extra layers on top.
Yeah, exactly. And once you've considered all these factors, then you go to 7.2.3, which lists out the knowledge and skills needed, the specifics. But before that, there's 7.2.2, which talks about personal behavior.
Ah, right, because it's not just about what's in your head, it's about how you act, how you interact with people. So what does the standard say about that?
7.2.2 links back to the principles of auditing, which we won't get into now. But basically, it's saying, hey, these behaviors are key for building trust and making sure the audit's done right ethically.
Okay, give me the rundown. What kind of personal qualities are we talking about here?
So first off, ethical.
Yeah.
They got to be fair, truthful, honest, sincere, discreet, no cutting corners, no hiding things. Got to be straight up.
Integrity is key, especially when you're kind of in a position of authority, right? Not that.
Open-minded. Got to be willing to consider different perspectives, even if it means changing their initial opinion.
Can't go in with blinders on, assuming you know everything already.
Exactly. Then, diplomatic. Tactful. You got to know how to communicate with people effectively without being abrasive or dismissive.
Makes sense. Auditing can be stressful for people, so a little bit of empathy goes a long way.
For sure. And then, observant. Paying attention, noticing details, picking up on things others might miss.
Like a detective, almost.
Kinda, yeah. And also perceptive. Understanding the underlying context. Seeing the bigger picture.
So it's not just about seeing what's there, it's about understanding what it means. Okay, what else?
Versatile. Got to be adaptable. Every audit's different. Every organization's different. You got to be able to roll with the punches.
Go with the flow. And sometimes audits can get tough, right? You hit roadblocks, people aren't cooperative. What then?
Got to be tenacious. Persistent, focused, driven to get the job done, even when it's challenging.
Don't give up easily. Okay, and at some point you got to make decisions based on what you found.
Right. So you got to be decisive. Able to analyze the evidence, weigh the options, and come to a conclusion.
And stick to your guns, even if it's not what people want to hear. What else is on this list of auditor superpowers?
Self-reliant, but also collaborative. So they can work independently when needed, but also know when to loop in others, work as part of a team, communicate effectively.
Balance, basically. Okay, anything else?
Fortitude. That's a big one. It means having the guts to report your findings honestly and ethically, even if they're not what the auditee wants to hear, even if it could cause problems.
That takes courage. Speaking truth to power, kind of.
Yeah, in a way. And then always open to improvement. Never stopping learning, always seeking feedback. trying to get better at what they do.
Humility, basically, recognizing that you can always learn and grow.
Exactly. And in today's world, especially, culturally sensitive. Got to be respectful of different norms and practices.
Right, because audits can take you all over the place, different countries, different cultures.
Yeah, and the last one is collaborative. Being able to work effectively with others, both your team members and the auditee. It's about building relationships, communicating clearly, working together towards a common goal.
Okay, so that's a pretty extensive list. It really paints a picture of, like, the ideal auditor, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's not just technically competent, but also, like, a good person, a professional.
Right. And the standards are making it clear. This stuff matters.
Yeah.
It's not just about checking boxes. It's about how you approach the whole process. Now, let's move on to the actual knowledge and skills, the technical stuff. 7.2.3 lays that out.
All right, so we've talked about who they are. Now let's talk about what they know and what they can do. What's the breakdown here?
So 7.2.3 starts with the general expectation. Auditors, they got to have the knowledge and skills to actually get the job done, achieve the audit objectives.
Makes sense. You can't just wing it. Got to have the right tools in your toolbox.
Exactly. And they break it down into two main categories: generic competence and then discipline or sector-specific knowledge.
Okay, so the generic stuff is like the foundation, transferable skills that apply to any audit.
Right. That's 7.2.3.2. And then 7.2.3.3 dives into the specialized stuff, the knowledge you need for specific types of management systems or industries.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. What are some of the key areas of knowledge and skill that every management system auditor should have?
All right, so the first big one is understanding audit principles, processes, and methods. This is the core, like how to plan, conduct, and report on an audit in a systematic, consistent way.
The nuts and bolts, basically.
Yep. And it includes understanding risk, not just the risks the organization faces, but the risks related to the audit itself. Got to be able to anticipate potential problems, plan around them.
Interesting. So there's a meta level of risk management happening even within the audit process.
Absolutely. And then time management. Auditors got to be organized, efficient, able to prioritize what's important.
Time is money, especially in an audit. What else?
Communication. Got to be clear, concise, both written and oral. Might even need to work with interpreters sometimes.
Right, because you're dealing with all sorts of people, different backgrounds, maybe even different languages.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's gathering information. Interviewing, listening, observing, reviewing documents, all that.
Being a good detective, basically.
Exactly. And knowing how to analyze that information, verify its accuracy. Sometimes you got to use sampling techniques, too.
Right, because you can't always look at every single piece of evidence. You got to pick and choose what's representative.
Exactly. And you got to be able to assess the reliability of your evidence, figure out what's trustworthy, what might be biased or incomplete. And sometimes you need to bring in experts.
If it's outside your area of expertise, got to know when to call for backup. Okay, so there's a lot to that first area. What's the next one?
Okay, so the next one is management system standards and other references. Basically, knowing the standards you're auditing against, inside and out.
So more than just like having a copy of the standard on your desk, you got to really understand it, how it works in practice.
Right. And knowing how it applies to different organizations. A small business is going to implement things differently than a huge corporation, even if they're both following the same standard.
And there might be multiple standards in play too, right? Like some organizations have integrated systems.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes you got to consider other documents, regulations, guidelines, things like that. Got to be able to navigate all that, see how it all fits together.
So the auditor's kind of like a translator, taking this complex web of requirements and making sense of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, the third area is the organization and its context. This one's about seeing the bigger picture.
So more than just the system itself, but the environment it operates in.
Right. Understanding the needs of the interested parties, who they are, what they want. Knowing about the organization's structure, its purpose, its management practices, even the cultural and social context matters.
Makes sense. You can't just audit in a vacuum. Got to understand the whole ecosystem.
Absolutely. And then finally, applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and other requirements. Basically, knowing the rules.
Legal stuff, contracts, all that.
Yeah. What laws apply to this organization? What regulations do they have to comply with? Any contractual obligations?
So the auditor needs to be a lawyer then.
No, no, no. The standard's very clear on that. They don't need to be a legal expert. It's more about awareness, understanding the legal landscape the organization operates in.
Okay, so it's like knowing enough to spot potential problems, but not necessarily having to give legal advice.
Right, exactly. The focus is still on the management system, but you got to see how those legal and regulatory requirements fit in.
Okay, that covers the generic knowledge and skills. What about the discipline and sector-specific stuff?
All right, so that's 7.2.3.3. Here, it's all about the specialized knowledge. And it emphasizes that the audit team as a whole needs to have the competence, even if not every individual is an expert in every area.
So it's like a team effort, combining different areas of expertise.
Right. They need to understand the specific requirements for that discipline, how they're applied in practice. They need to know the industry jargon, the key concepts.
So like if you're auditing a food processing plant, someone on the team better know about food safety regulations, HACCP, all that.
Exactly. And they need to be able to use the right audit methods for that specific sector. What works in manufacturing might not work in healthcare.
Makes sense. You got to adapt your approach to the context.
Right. And then they need to understand the unique risks and opportunities within that discipline or sector. What are the common pitfalls? What are the things that can really make or break an organization in this field?
The things that keep you up at night if you're in that industry, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so now let's talk about the team leader, the person in charge. 7.2.3.4 covers their competence.
All right, so leading an audit team, that's a whole other skill set, right?
Definitely. It's not just about being a good auditor yourself. It's about guiding and supporting a team.
So what are some of the key things a team leader needs to be able to do?
Well, first off, plan the audit. Define the scope, the objectives, and then delegate tasks to the team members based on their strengths.
Knowing your team, playing to their strengths, that's key in any leadership role, right?
For sure. And they need to be able to talk to top management about strategic stuff. How does the management system align with the organization's overall goals?
So they need to understand the big picture, how the audit fits into the strategic landscape.
Right. And they need to create a good team environment, collaborative, supportive, where everyone feels comfortable speaking up.
Building trust and open communication, that's huge for any team.
Yeah. And then there's managing the process itself.
Yeah.
Making sure the audit stays on track, resources are used effectively, dealing with any unexpected challenges that come up.
Keeping the train running on time, but also dealing with any derailments.
Exactly. And then there's mentoring, guiding the newer auditors, providing feedback, helping them develop.
Passing on the knowledge, building up the next generation.
Yeah. And then conflict resolution. Sometimes things get tense, disagreements happen, and the team leader needs to be able to step in and mediate.
Keeping the peace. Okay, and then there's communication outside the team, right?
Yeah, the team leader is the main point of contact with the audit program manager, the client, the auditee's representatives.
So they're the spokesperson, the face of the audit team.
Pretty much. And ultimately, they're responsible for the team reaching sound conclusions and for the audit report. They're the ones who sign off on it.
So they really hold the reins. They're accountable for the whole thing.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's talk about 7.2.3.5, which deals with multidiscipline audits. This is when you're auditing more than one type of management system at the same time.
So like auditing both the quality management system and the environmental management system together.
Right. And the standard says, look, in these cases, the team needs to understand how these different systems interact. Are there synergies, conflicts?
Yeah.
You can't just treat them as totally separate things.
Because in reality, they all exist within the same organization, impacting each other.
Exactly. And the team leader, they really got to know their stuff here. They need to understand the requirements of each standard and also be aware of their own limitations.
Like, okay, I'm strong on quality, but I need to lean on someone else for the environmental aspects.
Exactly. And there are two main types of multidiscipline audits: combined audits, where you're looking at different standards separately, and integrated audits, where the organization has mashed everything together into one system.
Okay, so different approaches depending on how the organization has set things up. Got it. Now, we've talked a lot about what competence is needed. How do you actually get that competence? That's where 7.2.4 comes in.
Right. 7.2.4 is all about the pathways to competence. And it's usually not just one thing. It's a combination of different experiences.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are the main ways someone can develop the skills and knowledge to be an auditor?
So one big one is training. Formal training programs that teach the basic principles, processes, methods, all that generic stuff we talked about.
So like going to a course, getting a certificate.
Yeah. That's often a good starting point. And the standard says the specific requirements for successful completion depend on the course. Might be an exam, might just be completing all the modules.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Different courses, different approaches. What else besides formal training?
Work experience, actually doing stuff in a relevant field, could be technical, managerial, professional. It's about developing those core skills.
Yeah.
Judgment, decision-making, problem-solving, communication.
Real-world experience that translates into auditing. Okay, what else?
Specialized knowledge, getting educated and trained in a specific management system, discipline, and sector.
So, like, if you want to audit in the aerospace industry, you got to learn about the specific standards and regulations that apply there.
Exactly. And then, probably the most important, on-the-job experience.
Yeah.
Actually doing audits, but under the supervision of a more experienced auditor.
Learning by doing, but with a safety net, someone to guide you.
Exactly. It's like an apprenticeship, almost.
Yeah.
And that brings us to 7.2.5, which talks specifically about how to become a competent team leader.
Okay, so leading a team, that's a step up, right? What does it take to get there?
So the standard says you need more audit experience overall, more than just a regular auditor. And specifically, you need experience working under another team leader.
So it's like observing leadership in action, seeing how it's done effectively.
Right. It's not enough to just read about it or take a course. You got to be in the trenches, learning by doing, getting feedback from someone who's already mastered the role.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Clause 7 really does lay out a comprehensive framework for understanding auditor competence, doesn't it? From personal qualities to technical skills to different pathways for development.
Absolutely. And it really drives home the point that the quality of the audit hinges on the competence of the auditor.
It's not just a process, it's about people.
Right. And we haven't even gotten into the nitty-gritty of how to evaluate that competence, which is covered in 7.3, 7.4, and 7.5.
We'll save that for another deep dive, maybe.
Definitely a topic for another day. But hopefully this discussion is giving you a good foundation for thinking about auditor competence, whether you're the one being audited or you're the auditor yourself.
It's definitely made me think about my own experiences with audits in a new light. Like, now I'm going to be paying attention to all these little things, seeing if the auditor's really ticking all the boxes.
And that's a good thing. The more we understand about auditor competence, the better equipped we are to ensure that audits are truly valuable, that they're driving improvement, not just going through the motions.
Food for thought, for sure.
And that's what these deep dives are all about.